Basic science of fracture healing. This is basically very, very similar to the previous talk I gave last week, but only a few of you were here. So, bone healing, in essence, whenever you answer a question on bone healing, you are talking about blood supply, you're talking about infection, and you're talking about host factors. That's important things to not forget to have in your mind, because those are critical elements of bone. The lights are on and off. And when you think about it, you know, the injury impacts all of those, doesn't it? The injury impacts all of those elements, and the surgeon also influences a bunch of those as well. So you influence blood supply in terms of how you choose your treatment, how periosteal stripping you do, etc. You influence infection, because if you're opening up, making a massive slash, that's got a higher, you know, likelihood of infection if you're doing something tiny or even you know, closed. And then of course host factors, and the surgeon also impacts on those as well. Yes, it's an unhappy. Feels like there's an unhappy connection somewhere, doesn't it? Anyway, we charge on. This is what I talked about last time, types of bone. Sorry, sweetie, it's going to bore you for a second, but we can't go like this, can we?
As long as no one's got epilepsy.
Yeah. No.
Maybe you did have lunch.
I'm going to plug off. I fear we have the same thing again. Types of bone. Last time we talked about types of bone, didn't we? We talked about lamellar bone and we talked about woven bone. Oh, fuck's sake. We talked about, but also we talked about other two types of bone, which was cortical and cancellous, right? The fundamental difference between cortical and cancellous is, what's the difference between cortical and cancellous bone?
Just the structure of it.
Sure, tell me.
So one's conversion canals, lamellar, and working spot. Space between.
Okay, so that's lamellar bone right there, isn't it? Is that lamellar bone?
Yeah.
Yeah, it says lamellar, doesn't it? Okay, that's lamellar bone. Do you think that's, what is that? Where do you think that is? Is that a trabecular bone or is that in cortical bone? That's a cortical bone. Yeah. How would you know that? Why did you think that?
Because the layers are tight range.
Okay, the layers are pretty tight, I'll give you that. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
There's more layers than 7 on it that you can reach for the layers.
What do you see in cortical bone? One word. Sorry? Conversion canals. See any conversion canals? I can't see any. Therefore it must be cancellous bone, right? That's the middle of a trabeculum. That's not, there's no conversion, there's no osteon there, is there? There's no conversion canal, there's no like circular thing. That's. So, I guess if maybe you'd sliced it straight down, not in the middle of the thing. Okay, maybe. Oh, who says that? So, on the cortical side, you have conversion canals. There they are. On the trabecular side, you have trabeculae. And the fundamental difference between those two, between that guy and that guy, what's different? How does that make itself, and how does that make itself? What's the fundamental unit that's different between that and that?
The cutting cone.
Cutting cone and house-shaped lacuni. Yeah, everyone got that? So a cutting cone is like a big tunnel boring machine where the osteoclast goes down the tunnel, makes a massive tunnel, and then plasters the walls with, well, the osteoclast plasters the walls with increasingly circumferential layers of bone, layer, until you come to the middle, and you've got a blood supply going right down the middle, and all of the osteocytes around the edge, all of these guys around the edge of the thing, all getting their blood supply. So this guy here is getting his blood supply from the central canal. Yeah? This guy here, that dude, right, or there, that guy is getting his blood supply from the central canal. Okay? Fine. Hypertrophic, how does that work? Well, in the osteon, it was a big tunnel, wasn't it? It was a tunnel boring machine. Fuck, it's it was a tunnel boring machine. I don't think we're going to fix it though. I'll try a different hole. How about that? But I can't believe that's the problem. It feels like a dodgy connection, doesn't it? It feels like a sort of, okay. Over here, instead of it making a tunnel, it digs a thing out of the floor, digs a big hole out of the floor, doesn't it? And then in that massive hole in the floor, like a digger coming and making a massive hole, the osteoblasts come along and they lay down layer, they fill up the hole is now lovely and flat, and if you were to cut through that bit of new road, what you would see is very similar to what we saw earlier on. Layer. Take it back up. That one could have been an osteoblast cut down. I hadn't even occurred. But you are. Okay. And then there's woven bone, which I'm not going to get too much into, but woven bone is where it's still the same collagen type 1, it's the same stuff, it's the same substance. What's the difference between woven and lamellar? Totally messy. Give me an example, give me it's messy. So if lamellar bone is lots of carpets laid on top of one another, pop, what would woven bone be?
Like a wool ball?
It's like a ball of wool, isn't it? Like a ball of wool. It's like you've got a load of wool and you just throw it into a room, and then you start jumping around with it. And the difference being, the primary difference being, in terms of mechanics, the lamellar bone is much stronger. It's stronger, but it's stronger in certain planes, isn't it? What's that word? What's the word I'm looking for? Sorry? Anisotropic. Explain.
So, if there's a force applied in the direction in which it's strong, then it's that force. So there's very isotropic, where you can apply force in multiple directions and the same direction.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. So if you align your fibres like this or like this, then it will be strong in certain directions. If it's equally strong in all directions, that's woven bone, which is isotropic. Anisotropic is lamellar bone. But overall, it's very, very much stronger. By lining up your collagen fibres, it does another thing. It protects you against fatigue. Against fatigue cracks propagating through the bone. So that's what you get. You get woven bone in fractured callus. You get it in a growth plate. We talked about the growth plate last time. I won't go on about that again. It's this bit in here. What's this lumpy bit on the side? Remind us what that is. That little bit here. What's that? You see that at the edge of fractures, don't you? That little lumpy bit at the side. What's that? It's periosteum, isn't it? Exactly. It's periosteal new bone growth. What kind of bone production is that? You were here last time. Do you know how the bones are made in that respect? What kind of ossification is that? Is it endochondral or is it intramembranous?
That's 50-50.
It's intramembranous, yeah. It's totally intramembranous. In other words, bone is being made de novo, it's being laid down straight. It's not having to go through a cartilage middleman. So that is endochondral ossification, chondral meaning cartilage. This is periosteal, which is intramembranous. So actually you have two going on at the same time in any fracture healing situation. And then we'll talk about the growth plate, which I won't go on about again. You also get woven bone in pathological states. Then you get it in Paget's, you get it in tumours, osteogenic tumours, and you get the growth plates. Great, that's types of bone. I've whizzed through that because it's really important that everyone understands the difference between trabecular and cortical bone. They are both lamellar, but the lamellae are organised different. One, they're organised in a circular fashion in tubes, and the other one, they're just in trabeculae. Okay, on we go. So we talked about blood supply, infection, and host factors, but the killer thing that the orthopaedic surgeon is in charge of is managing the strain. And strain is a funny word because it has all sorts of like weird, like non-mechanical connotations in the English language. So when you strain in English, it usually means that you are doing something very static. Yeah, it's not bad, that's totally different. But it's got a static feel like strain is a thing that happens without much movement, right? But actually in mechanics and orthopedics, strain is change in length over original length. Yeah? Change in length over the original length. Someone explain that one to me. Change in length over original length. How do you expect? What are the units of strain?
Percentage.
Yeah, it's a ratio. It doesn't really have units, does it? Yeah, you can put it as a percentage if you want. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's like movement at a fracture site.
It's movement at fracture site. So when people talk about strain, you're not talking about implants. You're not talking about bits of metal and screws and stuff. You're talking about movement at a fracture site. That's what strain is. Movement at a fracture site. Okay. And the weird thing about strain is this change in length over original length. If you go to that top one, you've only moved that guy by 5 microns. So you've got a 10 micron gap. You move it by 5 microns. That's a 50% strain. It's a massive strain. Even though you're only moving by 5 microns, it's a huge strain. And that's probably not going to heal. Whereas this guy down here, and if you go by 20 microns, it breaks. Whereas this guy, he's 40 micron gap. If you strain him by 5 microns, it's only 12% strain. Yeah? So it's not just how much you move it, it's what the fracture looks like in the first place that's important, that impacts on your strain. Change in length over original length. Okay. Movement at a fracture site. If there's one thing you take away, strain is movement at a fracture site. Okay, so you hear people talk about optimizing the strain environment. Of course, you've heard all this story before. Anyone who's done orthopedics knows about relative stability and absolute stability. One is allowing yourself some strain, and the other one is allowing yourself no strain. Okay, and of course, if you allow yourself strain, you get callus, and if you allow yourself no strain, you get no callus. That is something I'm going to hear me say at least another 17 times. But it's a funny old thing. So here's a haematoma. You've sort of seen this sequence, haven't you? Oh God, it's going to be. Here's the fibrous cartilage, then it goes to woven bone, and then it goes to remodeling, okay? Let's just go back a second. So you go from the haematoma, right? Haematoma goes to fibrocartilage. How the fuck did that happen? How did it do that? Because that looks like a healing bone, doesn't it? And that looks like a bag of blood to me. You've broken your bone ends, it bleeds, you get this haematoma forming. Now what? How does that turn to fibrocartilage?
It has fibroblasts in it.
Does it? Has it got fibroblasts in it? Has it got fibroblasts? Has it got anything in it? It's also got it's blood that's clotted.
So it's you get the first wave of macrophages and ciliate cells.
How do they get in there?
Yeah, the epithelial.
How does a macrophage get in there? Right there. How does he do it?
So you get the surroundings, soft tissue, redenervations, and well, first of all you get the.
What does he do? Does he munch his way in from the outside to the in? Sorry? Say again?
Texas?
So that thing you have a low oxygen concentration, so you press it towards that.
Right. Right. first thing that has to happen, a macrophage can't live in the middle of that. It's got no blood supply. The first thing that has to happen in any scenario is blood vessels got to go in first. Now, blood vessels don't mind doing that because, as you said, there are lots of like damaged cell degradation products. There's been an accident, and there's like all sorts of bad things are going on in that haematoma, and so yes, there's chemotaxis for sure. But the first thing to come in has got to be a blood vessel, hasn't it? So he comes in, he worms his way into that haematoma, and he brings with him the cell population. Yeah? And blood vessels like that. Blood vessels like growing into a haematoma there's basically got no oxygen in it. That's how blood vessels work. That's how angiogenesis works. You have chemotactic factors, but you also have a low oxygen tension. Hypoxic area, blood vessel grows into it. That's what blood vessels do. They revascularize anoxic areas. So, blood vessels come first. They bring a cell population with them. Because there's histamine and all sorts of chemotactic factors, the blood vessel then becomes permeable, and all the cells migrate out. And yes, then you start getting macrophages chewing it down, and you get all of these like lovely, the fibroblasts you were talking about, and the chondroblasts you're talking about, and so there's actually a phase between haematoma and fibrocartilage, isn't there? What's that phase in between? Granulation tissue, exactly right. This dud, empty, dead as a doornail hematoma turns into granulation tissue, which is basically a wasp's nest of activity. It's like buzz, 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 there's loads of shit going on, and all of the cells are like deciding what they're going to do, and they're marshalling themselves, and they are expressing fibroblasts and chondroblasts. Yeah? Chondroblasts producing cartilage, fibroblasts producing fibrous tissue. I'll come back to that. Then that is, upon that scaffold is laid woven bone. Woven bone and fibrous tissue are basically the same thing. They're really, really similar. The only difference being the one gets calcified and one gets mineralized. Yeah? So the calcified one it's just calcium coming into it, and woven bone gets probably ossified with hydroxyapatite. So it's actually the crystal that goes into the type 1 collagen. That's the only difference between calcified fibrocartilage and woven bone. It's the same cartilage, type 1. And then it gets remodeled by the... Who remodels it? The cutting codes and the osteoclasts, exactly right. Great, okay, there it is in your rats model. And when you see the kid in clinic who's got like a broken wrist or forearm, and you say to them, oh look, we can see the new bone forming, at 5 weeks or whatever, because there's new bone being seen. Actually, that's not quite right, is it? It's actually calcified fibrocartilage, but that doesn't run off the tongue, so you say, you can see your son's calcified fibrocartilage forming, but that's what that is, and then it turns into woven bone subsequently. Great. And of course there's this thing called strain tolerance. So we have this cascade, don't we? It starts off with granulation tissue, and there's a fibrous connective tissue, and then the fibrous fibrocartilage, and fibrocartilage with woven bone, and then lamellar bone, and then and lamellar bone is obviously the finished product. Why? Why not go straight from granulation tissue down all the way down to lamellar bone? Why not just miss out the middleman and go boom straight to it? Sorry? Why not miss out the middleman? Why is the body designed this crazy system with fibrocartilage in the middle?
You need that gradual change in the amount of strain that it can withstand for the stages of the
Right, okay. So the strain over time of a fracture site goes down slowly, isn't it? It's a gradual change from being really quite mobile, 100% strain, down to after 15 weeks in this rat's femur, no strain whatsoever. And it's a slow, progressive thing. So you can't, there's no chemical reaction that goes boom, boom, and then carries on like that. Well, there is, it's cement, but it's highly exothermic, like plaster cast. That's what that does, isn't it? It goes soft, 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 boom, hard. And that's great, but it gets really hot, and obviously your cells wouldn't survive. So this is the way the body's worked out of stiffening a fracture site slowly, slowly. Okay, so back to this. There's this idea of strain tolerance. So if you are fibrous tissue and you're wanting to move on to woven bone or fibrocartilage, but you keep you take that fracture, you keep moving it, you don't let it stiffen up, you just keep freaking moving it. Oops, sorry. You keep moving it. What happens? Fibrous non-union, yes. And what?
Because it stays fibrous, but you're moving too much for it to actually move.
Right, because Perrin told us, didn't he, that woven bone can only tolerate like 5% strain, a very small amount of strain. So if you keep bloody moving it, I can't give you woven bone. Yeah? And that was Perrin's strain theories. You have each tissue in that cascade has a strain tolerance. And the strain tolerance, if it hasn't reached that level of, the strain hasn't reduced enough for you to reach that strain tolerance, that strain level, then that tissue will not be expressed. Okay, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. But if you keep straining, that's what you get, isn't it? Which is exactly as Hassan said, that's your fibrous non-union. Okay. So, these are fibroblasts. There they are. They're on a little tray. We talked about this last time as well. Oopsie. You've got a little manifold. You've got these little yellow jobs are your fibroblasts, and they are sitting on a little agar plate. And then what happens is the manifold stretches them like that. What happens? What happens to a fibroblast if you stretch it? Somebody who wasn't here yet last week. What happens? You take a fibroblast right here and you stretch him. What happens? Like you don't stretch him, you stretch the plate that he's on. What happens? What happens? What does the cell do? Nelson, what does the cell do? If you're a cell and suddenly it's like a miniature earthquake, and suddenly your legs were like this, but now they're like this, what do you do? You do stretch a bit, yes you do. Are you loving it or are you not loving it? Well, you are loving it. You are loving it. You are loving it. What do you do then? To express your love for this movement that's going on between your feet, what do you do? No, you don't love one, no? Sorry? No, you don't. Quite the opposite. You stretch out. You align yourself, you align membranous projections in line of the strain. You line up with the strain. All the cells line up with the strain. Like an alarming. If you stretch the agar, they send out cytoplasmic projections along that line of strain. That's how collagen fibers line themselves up, isn't it? Yeah? In a tendon, in a bone, in any kind of system where collagen is being laid down in an organised way. How on earth does it do that? Because the cells detect the strain. The cells detect the strain. They line up their membranous projections in line with that strain, and then they produce collagen. And the collagen is laid down on their membranous projections, and therefore it's by its nature, lined up. Because the fibroblasts are lined up. Therefore the collagen fibers are lined up, because it's sitting on their membrane. There is your collagen fiber lined up along the line of strain. It's not magic. The cells just do it because that's their immediate response to any strain. The point being that each of these, if you are a mesenchymal stem cell, there's all sorts of things you could turn into, right? You could turn into any of those things along the bottom. Bone, there's cartilage, muscle, there's tendon, fat, all sorts of stuff. You've really got quite a good choice. You can do any of those you like. Where's osteoclast, by the way? Which one of those is osteoclast? Sorry? Different lineage, right? Okay, so there's a separate diagram, a bit like this, isn't it, for blood cells, hematopoietic stem cells, which have their own cascade, and they've got things like macrophages, monocytes, and osteoclasts, those massive multinucleate cells, yeah? But that's not, this is mesenchymal. Mesenchymal means, what's mesenchyme? Connective tissue, okay? All that lot is connective tissue. So, we've got a mesenchymal stem cell. How does he decide? How does he decide which of those dudes along the bottom he's going to become? Sorry? That's going to be in there. Strain's going to be in there. What else? Right, the chemical environment. So those are your two things that basically decide what this dude turns into. He needs the chemical environment. There's no doubt about that. There is a huge range of cytokines, growth factors, and we don't understand any of them. But you need those in place in order for a cell to multiply. But you also need a strain. So what might decide whether he went to become a bone cell or a cartilage cell or a fibroblast, for example? Right, the amount of strain, not just the fact the strain there, the amount of strain. And this is what I want you to say. Peril strain theory is okay, it's kind of helpful, but what I would like you to think is that actually, if you look at this is an ancient slide, but if you look at this so up on the y-axis is the gene expression, how much a gene is expressed. And along the x-axis, you've got days after fracture. So granulation tissue gets expressed, the gene for granulation tissue, then the gene for cartilage, then the gene for bone. So the gene for bone isn't turning on in this rat model until about like 10 days or so. Like you're not getting any bone, it's just not switched on. And when you look at that, you think that almost looks pre-programmed, doesn't it? It looks like there's kind of like a sort of sequence of events. Okay, so we're gonna set the timer, boom, set the timer, and then so granulation kicks off first, but cartilage used to, hang on a sec, and when the second buzzer goes, then cartilage goes, then sort of, cartilage turn, and then he comes charging out the door, and then wait, bzz, okay, great, the bones can go, and he goes off, but he can't go till 10 days. But it's not like that, is it? It's the strain environment that causes this cell to decide what he's turning into. That's all it is. The mesenchymal stem cell is pushing out precursors at the top end. Your chondroblasts, your osteoblasts, the guys at the top layer, there's the precursors, if you like. Those will only proliferate if the strain environment is correct. So it's not that it's pre-programmed, it's the fact that until the amount of strain is correct, those osteogenic precursors will not proliferate. But as soon as it is correct, off they go. Strain, growth factors, blood supply, pathology, those all impact on what the mesenchymal stem cells do, or how much they're able to proliferate. And that's basically the reason why, the factors that influence growth that impact fracture healing, that's those guys there, isn't it? The strain environment dictates the cell type that proliferates at any one time during fracture healing. So, this is this classic AO video. You've got that one. It is a convoluted fracture. This is a simple diaphyseal fracture. You move them by the same amount, and what you notice is this guy up here really gaps. There's a massive strain. This one hardly gaps at all. That's a high strain environment on the right and a low strain environment on the left. So if you turn that into fractures, that's what you would call a low strain environment, whereby you've got this long convoluted fracture, and if you put some bridging construct on that, like this kind of plate, like a bridging plate like that, then or a Lamellar frame or an intramedullary nail, for example, what you'll end up with is relative stability and callus formation. Here's the forearm fracture we saw, which is treated with intramedullary nails. What kind of construct are those? Is that relative or absolute stability? It's a relative stability construct, but it's quite a high strain fracture, isn't it? What's going to happen? Hypertrophic Non-union. Looked like it was going to heal, didn't it? Back in the day, we did loads of that, like nailing adult forearms. Totally didn't work. They had to all go back for revision places. Why does it work on kids, by the way? How do it's so unfair, isn't it? Like kids' fractures just heal like that, and adults you have to like worry about the strain and shit like that. What's different in kids? What's the deal?
Periosteum.
Exactly, it's the periosteum. The periosteum is so much thicker and so much more active in kids, And usually in children, they've broken one way or the other. So on the concavity, on the inner side, the periosteum is still intact because it's a thick, thick layer in kids. And therefore, the periosteum, you line it back up again, periosteum on this side just starts bang, 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 lays down bone directly, intramembranous ossification. So it doesn't go through a cartilage middleman, just lays down new bone, bang, 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 bang. And suddenly, you've got your stiffness back. So in kids' fractures, you've got both the endochondral bit with callus, but you've also got a lot more periosteal new bone growth. So that's callus. Okay. Take home message with this is, if you do not strain a fracture, if you do not move it, there's no movement whatsoever, you will not get any bone healing. You will not get any callus formation, I should say, not bone healing. You will not get any callus. No movement, no callus. Think about the cell being stretched. Think about the mesenchymal cell precursors going down to each lineage. They will only multiply to become a load of osteoblasts or a load of fibroblasts if there is some strain. If there's no strain, they can't be asked. It's like, well, there's nothing going on. There's no point in becoming a fibroblast. There's no strain for me to worry about. Otherwise, we'd all be suddenly turning into fibrous tissue, wouldn't we? We don't, because the strain environment's not there. If you take a piece of skin and you start going, and you start pinching yourself all month, you get like a big fat, like fibrous nodule there, because the fibroblasts are like, oh my God, something's kicking off here. We've got some strain going on. Let's multiply, and by God, they will. Okay, relative stability, absolute, no callus, absolute stability, and again we know this from our AO basic course, where if you take up two bone ends, you put them together and you just like squeeze them together really, really hard so they can't move at all, that's absolute stability, and you get no callus. Why do you get no callus? Because there's no freaking strain, okay? Absolute direct bony contact, ideally compressed together. And this is the classic AO teaching, isn't it? You've got like a nice diaphyseal forearm fracture, you squeeze it together like that. Just for the exam, tell me some ways you can compress a fracture. Anuj, tell me 4 ways you can compress a fracture.
So you can do that by lag screw,
Yeah.
either by design or by technique.
Okay, so this is
lag screw by
this dude here's a lag screw, isn't he? So they've over-drilled this side and they've under-drilled this side. It gets grip on this side. The head gets jammed in the top. What's the thing you've got to be cautious of if you're doing this? From the technical point of view.
So basically you just want to make sure that the head is not fractured when you put it.
And how do you do that?
So you just basically try to
Countersink's the word. You put a countersink in to reduce the stress, not the strain, the stress at the apex where the head comes down. Okay, so you countersink it a little bit. Yeah. What else? Another way you can reduce compression.
So you can do a lag screw by design. So when you have the lag screw is partially threaded, so you.
We've done. Yeah. Okay. Lag screw can be over drilling or it can be partial threads. I agree. Yeah. Give me another one.
Then as the plate compression placing as.
Yeah. That's another way of doing. Yeah.
Eccentric drilling. So you can push.
Yep. Eccentric drilling. Excellent. Any others? Sorry? Variable pitch on a screw, hardcore, you've added one in, nice. Yeah, go and buy that like Accutrack style. Herbert screw. Yeah. Pre-bend the plate, nice. So you pre-bend your plate so that when you put it flat on it, or you put it flat on the bone, it wants to do this, and therefore it compresses the far side of the bone. That's absolutely right. So compression, pre-bending the plate. One more.
Dynamize your nail.
Dynamize a nail. Yeah, okay. Yeah, alright.
Can you say tension band or complete compression?
No, we're talking about plate.
Tension band?
Okay, yes, alright, yeah, tension band, yes, alright, yeah. Sorry? Right, okay, so your plate is here, and then you can put a screw outside of the plate, and then you can put a clamp between those two and squeeze the plate onto the screw, having fixed into the far fragment. Yeah. That's good. We did that just today at theatre. Yeah, absolutely. So an external compression screw. Nice. Okay. That is a list you really want to be able to rattle off for the exam. Here's how I compress the fracture site. There are a bunch of them, but if you can knock them out, it's slick. Okay, so there you go. Absolute stability with a lag screw and a plate for neutralization. Nice. And that gives you what? primary bone healing. What are you seeing in that diet, in that picture there? What are you seeing? Cutting cones. These, yep, that's right. So here's your fracture line, that little jaggedy line there. And this dude here is a cutting cone. Boom. There's an osteoclast right at the top there, isn't there? And he's driving up. And you can see as the cutting cone goes along, it slowly fills in the osteoblast behind and laying down new bone in a circumferential manner. Boom, 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 until it's a little hole down the middle with a blood vessel in it. Great. Okay, there it is. Okay. What if there's a gap? What if there's a gap? This used to really freak me out. What if there's a gap? So, here we go. Two bone ends shoved together, and look, it's touching there, and you can even see there's a little cutting cone. Look, boop, out it goes. So, in that middle bit, the cutting cone made it across. What about this bit? Just do it. What's there? What's going to happen there? No, there's no strain here. No, it's a compressed fracture. There is zero strain here. So if you say callus, I'm not going to give it to you. Sorry? Jump the gap. Okay, so how much can an people talk about osteocyte jumping distances, don't they? Osteocytes do not jump. Osteoblasts do not jump. They definitely don't jump. So don't say talk about jumping distances because it's bollocks. Osteoclasts can bridge a gap if that gap is smaller than they are. Yeah? So an osteoclast, they're big mofos, osteoclasts. They're about 150 microns in diameter. They're big things. So if you have a gap that's only 50 microns, an osteoclast can actually go across it. He's not jumping, but he's just going across it because it's smaller than he is. Okay? What happens if that gap gets a bit bigger? Let's say it's 100 microns or 150 microns. Now what?
Bridge from both sides.
Sorry? Two cutting cones. That would take some serious engineering. That'd be so cool. What would the osteoclasts do to each other? Like, oh my gosh! Like brush border or brush border. Like, yeah, it's not that. Well, I've never heard anyone say that before. So that's a great answer. No, it's not two osteons coming together end on end. How the okay, over here. Come on, you bastard. You made it.
Sorry.
Over here, I can tell you that is way bigger than osteo. That's way more than 150 microns. How the hell is this going to heal or not? What's going to happen? And that would be called. Good. Let's have a look. See if you're right. So here we go. Here's your gap. Decent size. So they say 50 microns is the critical level. It's not quite the critical level because if you're a little bit bigger than 50 microns, you may still heal. And if you're a little bit less than 50 microns, you might not heal. But 50 microns is the gap that an osteoclast can charge across. Okay? As you get bigger and bigger and bigger, up towards 100, 150, it becomes less and less likely that the osteoclast can go across, and therefore you get gap healing. So, here's your gap. Just explain it again how it works.
So you said last week osteoblasts like flat surfaces.
They do.
So you have two flat surfaces, you have osteoblasts that are laid in layers, not concentric, but lamellar layers, you run there until the gap is
Not woven.
They've got
Not woven.
not them out. And then you have the gap will narrow on either side of the position one that is small and grow it.
Right, so remember the house ships and the cooling, where you dug out that hole in the thing, and the osteoblasts went into the thing and lay down bone, into the thing and lay down bone, pop, 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 until they filled up the trench, right? Same deal. One lot of osteoblasts come down and lay down a line of bone. Another layer of osteoblasts come down and lay a line of bone. Boom, 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 onto the bone ends. They keep trying and trying and trying and trying. Eventually, so you were sort of right that you are attacking it from both sides until the gap now becomes less than 50 microns. Boom! Here he comes. Whoa, this guy's already across. Bang! You get your cutting case coming. Oh, there he is. There he is. Lovely. Look at that. wallop. That's gap healing. Okay? So if you're more than 50 to 100 microns, you get gap healing where the osteoblasts lay down sequential layers until the gap is less than 50 microns and then a cutting cone can pass. What if it's like 5 centimeters? Like a bone and leather here, a bone, it's never going to heal, right? So there is a point at which gap healing is not going to work for you because you've literally strutted out too far. But we've all fixed fractures, haven't we? I don't know how many fractures you've fixed, but like if, I've fixed a few forearm fractures, and not every single one of them was absolutely, perfectly, anatomically, totally and utterly reduced like millimetrically. And I'm thinking, maybe there is a little gap there. Is that going to heal? The answer is yes, it does heal. It heals by gap healing, which is lucky for us orthopedic surgeons. So that's primary osteomal bone ligament. For osteomal, it's got osteons, right? So that works for a simple forearm fracture. Yeah, that works nicely for that. It works nicely for a clavicle fracture if you anatomically reduce it. Also humerus, although with humerus, you know, it's actually quite difficult to get a humerus absolutely clicked in, pure anatomic, in the same way as a forearm, because it's just a much bigger bone. Okay, this is a vertical shear medial malleolus fracture, and there's no surprises. That is what it is. I think there's a little avulsion, a little ligament avulsion down here. But basically, it's a vertical shear medial malleolus. Johnny, how are you fixing that? That's kind of like trauma this afternoon. There's no tricks or excitement. It's just it is what it is. What's your operation going to look like? Buttress plate where?
So on the medial side, effectively 2 screws into the more proximal section, and then the lid pushes down into the ankles.
Lovely. Lovely. Okay. Yeah, everyone happy with that? We use a buttress plate and maybe some screws across the bottom. That's what we did. There's the buttress plate. You could argue that buttress plate could be a little bit further down, but it's a buttress plate. And more importantly, what's the mode of stability? Mode of fracture healing. Sorry, mode of stability. It's absolute or relative? Absolute, right? Absolute. So there's not going to be any. There's going to be no strain. There's definitely not going to be any callus. All right. So I can tell you this X-ray is actually taken at 3 months. You can see actually. You can see that because you see in the lateral gut, see all that junk in there, all that fibrous tissue and scar tissue and all those little bits of bone that are formed in the corner, you know, in response to the trauma on the lateral side. So this is the patient's walking on this. He's been walking on this for weeks. Where's the bone heal? How did it heal? How did it heal? Because I can tell you, if you took all that hardware off right now, it will be stuck fast. You couldn't refracture it if you tried. So how did it heal? Primary bone healing. Not sitting easy though, is it? When you said it's a problem. Why is it not sitting easy? Why? It's trabecular bone. So are we saying cutting cones went across there? If I biopsy that area, am I going to see cutting cones? I can tell you the answer is no. There are no cutting cones there. So how the fuck did it heal? Because it totally has healed. And it's something nobody ever really talks about. It's primary cancellous healing. It's not in any book. I've only ever heard myself talk about it in stuff because no one ever talks about how cancellous surfaces stick themselves together. But here's the analogy. You've got a bombed out set of flats, okay? There it is. And in your mind's eye, I want you to imagine, we'll clear out all those people out of the way, get the people out of the way, and you are in a block of flats. You're honestly in a nice, plush block of flats, not bombed out, immediately facing that way. Okay? I can't. It's what it is. Stop believing. I know it's right. I'm not. This isn't me. It's just the flicker. You have to get used to it. These guys. It actually keeps them away. Med students haven't fallen asleep at all, just because they're all having like little pussy male singes.
Easy love.
So I want you to imagine you are in a block of flats here, and that is facing you and looking out at this bombed out block of flats. I want you to now imagine, you're in a nice block of flats, and there's this bombed out. I want you to imagine you put their block of flats on wheels now, and you wheel it towards you. And you're here, right? And it like literally comes up right next to your window. Okay, right, literally, it's here. Here's your thing, and you can open the window, and you can step out into, like, this guy's flat over here. This guy's settee and staff. His TV wasn't damaged in the bomb, that's still working. He's got some quite nice pictures on the wall, and literally you can get out of your window. I'm not going to get out just straight. I'm going to get my electric flex, my electric, like thing. I'm going to toss it through my blood supply, and I'm going to climb through. Right, there we are. Awesome! I've just doubled the size of my house. How cool is that, right? And now I can start like laying down, like plastering walls, bringing sofas and furniture in, getting my mates in to come and help make things nice and look good. And there is a bit of a gap in the floor, don't get me wrong. I can start throwing down some plaster to cover up that gap because there is no movement between the two buildings. Yeah? I'm able to lay down bone primarily, in other words, intramembranous ossification, just laying down bone de novo into the gap. And that's why you don't see any callus there, is because basically the first thing to happen is a blood vessel grows into that new cancellous bone, and he brings the cell population with him. So it's like the bit of bone, the bit of cancellous bone here, gets brought back to life, gets sort of reanimated by blood vessels growing into him, bringing him back to life and laying down brand new bone in the gap. So the first thing obviously to happen is, of course, angiogenesis, as it is in any situation. You then get, there's virtually no strain, so it's primary bone healing. It's not endochondral, it's intramembranous. It's osteoblasts laying down woven bone directly into that gap, laid onto the existing structure, and then, subsequently, the osteoclasts come in and go, right, okay, let's take this is a dog's dinner in here, let's take this out, starts ripping down the walls, tearing out, making house ships lacunae in the new block of flats, and the osteoclasts come in and dutifully go, and lay down a nice lamellar bone where the osteoclast has tuned it out. All the way over here, boom, boom, and slowly this old house, bombed out flat, now suddenly comes back to life again. And that's primary cancellous healing, and because it happens really quickly, because it doesn't have to go through a cartilage middleman. That's why cancellous bone sticks together really quick. That's why distal radius fracture heals super fast. If you've got a distal, like that medial malfracture, you can walk them at 6 weeks because cancellous bone heals fast. Because the blood vessels realise there's an injury, they're straight in there. And as soon as they're in there, the cell population's in there, and the cell population doesn't have to go through a cartilage middleman, they can go straight to woven bone, bang! Done. And there it is. You've got two trabecular surfaces, 1-1. You've got a tiny, tiny gap, but no strain whatsoever. 3 weeks, you start seeing these new trabeculae coming across, like so. That's the soft tissue in between. And then at 4 weeks in this rat, you've got new trabeculae covering the gap between the two. That's how, and there's not a freaking Haversian canal in the building. Okay? No Haversian canals. Haversian canals are to break down one specific type of bone, and that is cortical bone. I'll explain why. Just going to take a little sidetrack. Bone graft, yeah? Iliac crest bone graft. So you take a lump of someone's iliac crest, and you take a lump of cortico-cancellous graft. There it is. That's annoying, isn't it? And you might do, for example, a tibial osteotomy or something like that. Some sort of like procedure whereby you're creating a gap in the bone, and then you're putting your cortico-cancellous graft in the gap. That might be autograft or allograft, whatever you like, doesn't matter. What does that autograft look like when you look up close? It looks like that, doesn't it? It looks like that, which is, you can see where my analogy is coming from. The point is, if you are a bone unit, a piece of cancellous bone, and you're looking at that, if you're a cell and you're looking at that, those rooms, that honeycomb structure is massive. It's huge, isn't it, compared to you as a cell? You could drive your blood vessels straight in and start repopulating that surface. What's this? What is that slide of? Cortical structure. Tell us what a cortical strut graft is.
So it's a piece of cortical bone which has been used in Pilon plates of formation.
Right, so what bone is it?
It's a femur.
What's the bone they're fixing?
It's a femur.
It's a femur, isn't it? Yeah. They use cortical struts on the femur. Yeah. Okay. And so what they've done is they've also got. It's usually we don't use it much now because plates are good, but it used to be quite fashionable using cortical strut grafts. So you put a plate on the femur or around your periprosthetic fracture, and then you augment it by wiring on these massive cortical struts. And you think, well, they're bone, and therefore bone is good because it's like, it'll remodel, right? If you were a bone cell and you were looking at a piece of cortical bone, there's the cortical bone over here. We know what cancellous bone looks like to a bone cell. It looks like these massive rooms, doesn't it? What does cortical bone look like? Well, right. It looks like a Berlin Wall, doesn't it? Yeah? There's a live bit of bone in the middle. Here's a dead piece of cancellous bone. But look at the lovely big holes. Look at them. They're lovely, aren't they? You can drive straight in there. This guy, let's say there's a dead piece of cortical bone. You can't get in there. It's ivory. It's like a wall. It's complete. It's like that. The only way to get into cortical bone to remodel it is the cutting cap. Exactly. It's the only way you can get in there. You need a drill. Quick or not quick? Totally not quick. So when you think about primary cancellous healing, you do wonder why it's never been brought up before. Because it's pretty much every single fracture we fix almost. Think of all articular fractures, ankles, knobs, wrists. Let's take some examples. So here's an ankle fracture. It's a bimallear ankle fracture with a classic lateral displacement. And it's been fixed with, what mode of fixation is that? Absolute or relative? Absolute stability. How many times have we done that operation? And no one ever questions how it heals. How does it heal? Primary cancellous healing, right? This is all cancellous bone. This is all cancellous bone. But this is not the same as a fibula. We've all fixed as a forearm bone. We've all fixed fibulas. It's mainly cancellous, isn't it? And the cortex is really thin. There might be a little bit of osteonal action going on, but basically it heals. How come we can walk on them at 6 weeks? Because primary cancellous bone. There you go. Heals very nicely. It's actually a different ankle fracture, isn't it? What you can see here is there's actually a line across there. Can you see that? There's a line across this one. And there's also a line across this one as well. What's happened there? Yes, exactly. It moved a bit, didn't it? It moved, they probably walked on it a bit. And so it wiggled a bit. And where you get wiggle, you get callus. That's right. So if it really does stay absolutely stable and there is no movement, you will get no callus and you'll get primary cancellous. If there is a bit of movement, the body switches modes. It goes, oh, we've got some strain here, let's produce some endochondral ossification. Let's go through the usual cycle. Yeah? Sorry. Okay, next one. Pilon fracture. Doesn't project very nicely. You can see it's like a bit similar. You can see where I'm heading with this one, can't you? Again, it's a fracturing cancellous bone. Quite nice bone fragments. You can see they've done what you would probably call absolute stability here. Yeah, with a couple of screws. And they put it back into plaster for a bit. And then a few weeks later, they did that. And they fixed it with a plate. Absolute or relative stability. Ignore the fibula. It's absolute stability, isn't it? And actually, that's at 8 weeks. It's healed now. The guy's walking on it. You can hardly see the fracture lines anymore. He's walking on it, no callus whatsoever. None. Yeah? Amazing. Primary cancellous healing. Same situation. Obviously, so again, 5 months, no callus whatsoever. There's a tiny bit of periosteal elevation there. But you look where the meat and potatoes of the fracture was in here, nothing. Primary cancellous healing, no callus whatsoever. Now look at this guy. Similar. Pilon fracture. There it was. They fixed the fibula and they put it next to it for a while, and then they fixed it. This is back in the old days where they sometimes use non-locking plates to fix fractures. Okay? Reduction looks okay. And this is what it looked like a few weeks down the line, a few months down the line. Healed or not healed? It is healed, isn't it? Look at that. But how did it heal? With callus. In other words, because it was a non-locking plate, as the guy got going with it, it started moving a bit, didn't it? And therefore you've got strain, and where you get strain, you get callus. Fracture neck of femur. This is broken on this side, obviously. Look at this one. It was only broken like 2 months previously. Now totally healed. The patient actually fell before he left the hospital and broke the other side. Look at that one on the left. Any callus? No. It's because what happened was it was pretty undisplaced. And so they put the DHS in, he took one step on it, it compressed. It was so stable it didn't move at all, and you now get primary cancellous healing. One on the right side, you expecting some primary cancellous healing for that? How are you expecting this guy to heal? Callus galore, right? Because it's all collapsed and all the rest of it. But the point is, there's loads and loads of new bone formation around here. If you get movement, you get strain, and where you get strain, you get callus. If you have zero strain, you have zero callus. I keep saying that, but I'm almost finished. Intracapsular fracture. Yeah? Intracapsular NOV in a, how was the patient? 53-year-old. You probably wouldn't do this nowadays. But back in the day, when Mr. Goodyear used to rule this place, we weren't allowed to put hips into these. We had to internally fix them. And so that got internally fixed. There it is. It's totally great. Sorry. It's totally great. But you see how there's no callus there? Because they got a really good reduction. They fixed it, they compressed it, the patient walked on it a bit, and it didn't move. And therefore, it got primary cancellous healing. Check out this one. Again, it was an intracapsular fracture. And you can see that on the top cortex, this is now healed, he's walking on it. Top cortex, minimal callus, but on the medial cortex, actually there is a bit of thickness of sclerosis there, isn't it? So it probably did collapse a little bit, and there was a little bit of movement, and therefore there was a bit of strain, there was a bit of callus. So in the same fracture line, you can get callus on this side and no callus on this side, depending on how much movement there is at the different parts of the same fracture site. Okay, so I've thrashed that enough. Increasing strain, you've got absolute stability at one end and relative stability at the other. At this end, you get osteoblasts do their thing and there's no callus. At this end, you get fibrochondroblasts kicking off before the bone gets switched on. The bone gets switched on in response to the diminishing strain. So it's almost as though, in this scenario, it's almost as though the fibrochondral bit has already happened and they're just waiting for the strain to come down before it turn on. Remember those columns of cells? It is the strain environment that dictates which of those lineages proliferates. Fibro, chondro, osteo. This end, if you overstrain a fracture, you get a hypertrophic non-union, which is what you see there. You see that they fix it with a plate, it wasn't very strong, and you got lots of callus, but there's too much movement, and therefore it didn't heal. On the other end, you get direct healing. So when people ask you a question about bone healing in the exam, you say there are two types of healing. There is healing by callus, secondary healing, and there is direct healing. And direct healing can be direct osteonal, or it can be direct cancellous. And that's what you should have in your mind. One requires strain, one requires no strain. One is going through cartilage middleman, one is directly to bone. And you might be relating, and if you're going for direct healing, it can be augmented by gap healing if you're lucky, if you leave a gap. Okay? But if you make too much of a gap, you end up with an atrophic non-union because the gap healing just can't close it up enough that now an osteoclast can pass. Don't forget, blood supply. You've always got to, any of those modes of healing, they all require blood supply. For a callus, you've got to get into the haematoma, haven't you? You've got to get blood supply into the haematoma to bring a cell population in there. For direct healing, you've got to get new blood supply in to bring the cell population to either drive a cutting cone or drive or drive new osteoclast forming bone. Infection or tumour will influence fracture healing, as will host factors. Thank you. Any questions? Good times. 16, 17.
I think it's very important when you talk about this. Because sometimes you move and you work. Yeah. You move things and so on.
Yeah.
So when you've got primary cancellous bone healing, is it quite safe to take it out 3 months, 4 months?
Yeah, absolutely.
But the
Yeah.
other one is not. And clinical.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So sometimes you get confused. Sometimes you take out like lower areas too. Sometimes you don't. So we don't have really disagree on this.
I think
Because for primary cancellous healing, there's no point taking the CT scan and see the lesion. It's either can't see a fracture line.
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
But in the long term, then we will have to.
Yeah, but I mean, you've tried to move distal radius fractures at 4 weeks, right?
Yeah.
It's almost impossible. Isn't it? 6 weeks it is impossible. And so I think when we say, oh, you've got to leave your fracture at least 9 months to a year before I'd happily tell you what your harbor out, I think we're incredibly defensive on that. I think you could say take stuff out at 3 months if you really wanted to.
So we don't have the CT scan and everything.
I think you get a CT scan to prove that it's united. If you see bridging callus, I'm usually pretty happy to take the plate out unless it's just healed on one cortex and there's like a bone deficiency on the other side, and you know, yes, it has healed because it's bridged, therefore there's zero strain, and therefore this is going to go on and consolidate over time. But if it's just one cortex and you then take the hardware off, that takes away all support, and then you can get a fatigue fracture going through your nicely healed cortex.
And then in terms of distraction of surveillances, we are depending on primary cancellous distracted, very small bit of time.
Yeah.
So basically the cancellous bone is still kind of this is good.
Distraction osteogenesis produces cortical bone actually.
Yeah.
Produces a line of cortical bone. Ultimately,
That's what they say.
generates cortices.
But actually, if you look at it sequentially, it is a lot of cancellous combination.
Yeah. I don't think anyone's really got themselves heads around how you classify distraction osteogenesis.
This is very interesting. It's just that your lectures give us a lot of things we take for granted all the time.
Anything else?
You guys have to do this for an exam, but I can just get a time when
Time for the pub?
Sorry?
Time for the pub?